Sahyokyung's complexion was really pale. The feeling of the thread digging into the flesh was horrifying. There was no room for shame. Because everything happened in the blink of an eye. Cho Samchik was dragged into darkness, and Jong Sanwi lost his life. And the time it took for them to be subdued was only by a couple of breaths. In that brief moment, Pyeolwul eliminated the survivors of 7 stars and completely overpowered them. It was like a nightmare. As long as they live in Jeonhu, they thought that they would have no choice but to face a tough situation one day, but they never really knew that that moment would come so unannounced. Has there ever been an assassin like this in Jeonhu? He couldn't believe it even after experiencing it himself. Pyeolwul was an existence that completely rejected the common sense of an assassin. None of the common sense they knew applied to Pyeolwul. The fact that such an assassin existed in Jeonhu itself was a nightmare. The problem is that warriors outside Sichuan are currently unaware of this fact. There was a monster lurking in Sichuan. Sahyokyung did not even dare to move and rolled his eyes. He could see Yo Suliang, whose face had turned white. When Sahyokyung was suppressed, Yo Suliang looked alternately between Pyeolwul and Sahyokyung. A curse came out of nowhere. You idiot. Don't just look at me, go ahead, save me. However, with the soul-reaping thread choking his throat, his voice could not come out and only lingered in his mouth. At that moment, Pyeolwul opened his mouth. Why do you want to kidnap him? As soon as Pyeolwul's voice echoed in his ears, Sahyokyung felt a chill in his spine. That. Yo Suliang stuttered. She didn't know anything. It was just Sahyokyung who had received the request, so she just followed his orders. She had no interest in knowing the truth. Pyeolwul's gaze turned to Sahyokyung. Say it. The thread that was tightening Sahyokyung's neck loosened a little. Hyuk. I don't know. I was just commissioned. Kek. In an instant, the soul-reaping thread squeezed Sahyokyung's neck again. Sahyokyung's eyes bulged out as if they were about to pop out. Pyeolwul could tell whether the other person's words were true or not just by listening to the sound of his breath. The sound of Sahyokyung's heart beating anxiously was telling him that it was a lie. I won't ask you twice. Who ordered you? Kukguk. Sahyokyung's face turned red. Yo Suliang bit her lip at the sight of him who seemed to run out of breath at any moment. Wait. Let's solve it by having a conversation. A conversation? Aren't we already talking? Don't say it so terribly, gently. Yo Suliang threw away the sword she was holding in her hand. After raising both hands to convince him that she had no weapons, she proceeded to cautiously walk towards Pyeolwul. With every step she took, her voluptuous body stood out. Pyeolwul's gaze turned to her chest. In an instant, a smile appeared on Yo Suliang's lips. You're a man too. It was Yo Suliang, who had the confidence to possess any man even if it's the Jade Emperor himself. She seduced Pyeolwul with the most attractive facial expressions and gestures she could make. And exchanged glances with Sahyokyung. They could tell each other's thoughts just by looking at each other's eyes. Sahyokyung understood Yo Suliang's intention and nodded his head even in a situation where his breath ran out at any moment. Sahyokyung understood Yo Suliang's intention and nodded her head even in a situation where her breath ran out at any moment. Tuck. Yo Suliang took off her coat. Then her white collarbone was exposed. As long as we let go of him, we can have a good time. I don't like the harsh atmosphere at all. So why don't we just have a wonderful time? I promise to give you the greatest pleasure you'd ever feel in your life. Yo Suliang seductively said. Her eyes, whispers, and gestures radiated a fatal charm in trying to seduce Pyeolwul. It was impossible for any man to resist this temptation. At least, all the men Yo Suliang has seduced so far all fell to their knees, unable to bear it. Yo Suliang thought that it would be like this again, and approached Pyeolwul with a smile as beautiful as possible. Perhaps her temptation worked, the thread that tightened around Sahyokyung loosened a little. It's an opportunity. Sahyokyung turned around like a thunderbolt and flew. Qua. The energy that contained the power of his whole body hit Pyowool's chest. In an instant, Sahyokyung realized that something was wrong. Because he didn't feel anything in his hands. That was then. Behind you, brother. Yo Suliang urgently cried out. Sahyokyung instinctively turned around. But Pyowool was nowhere to be seen. Yo Suliang looked at Sahyokyung with a fearful look. To be precise, she was looking at Pyowool standing like a ghost behind Sahyokyung's back. Pyowool stood behind Sahyokyung from beginning to end. Still, Sahyokyung was unaware of that fact at all. You're back, back. Yo Suliang's words did not continue until the end. It was because a flash of light penetrated her forehead. Suliang. Sahyokyung's desperate cry resounded in the night sky. A ghost dagger was engraved on Yo Suliang's forehead. Without knowing that fact, Yo Suliang's body was already collapsing. Sahyokyung went crazy at the death of Yo Suliang. Arg! You crazy bastard! Kill, I will kill you! He lashed out like crazy, back and forth. Quack-quack-wang. Everything struck by his energy was destroyed. However, none of them managed to land on the body of Pyowool. Pyowool used the snake step while avoiding all the attacks and gave a blow to Sahyokyung's chest. Using jailbreak, he concentrated all of his power on one point. Poing. With the sound of the drum popping, Sahyokyung's body bounced back. There was a big hole in Sahyokyung's chest. You. Sahyokyung lay on the floor and looked up at Pyowool. The figure of Pyowool, who was looking at him indifferently, did not look like a human being. Ray, purr. Those were the last words Sahyokyung left. Pyowool looked at Sahyokyung's body for a moment and then turned around. All the members of the 7 stars who entered Chengdu were now completely annihilated. A group of warriors known in Hunan province was slaughtered in just one night. It was a major incident that would make a lot of noise if Jianghu's soldiers knew, but Pyowool, the main character of the incident, had an indifferent expression. Jianghu's fame or status could not impress Pyowool. He only divided people into 2 categories. Those who can kill him and those who cannot. And he confirmed it today. There are very few people who cannot kill him even if they make up their mind to it. Pyowool disappeared from the scene with Nam Xinwu in his arms. Long after he disappeared, 2 people, a man and woman, appeared at the scene where Sahyokyung and Yo Suliang were killed. Oh my god! The person who was astonished to see Sahyokyung's body was Yu Shinfeng, the shadowless monk. He could not close his opened mouth as he looked alternately at the bodies of Sahyokyung and Yo Suliang. It was the same with Li Soha, who followed behind Yu Shinfeng. The entire 7 stars have been wiped out? Against a single person, too. Does this make sense? He found it impossible to understand. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would have never believed in the scene unfolding before his eyes. Yu Shinfeng muttered in despair. A massive disaster was nesting in Chengdu. What should we do with this? Asterisk. Pyowool moved while holding Nam Xinwu. Pyowool's expression as he looked at Nam Xinwu, who had lost his mind, was not very bright. It was Nam Xinwu, who was bloodied because of Sahyokyung's harsh violence. But if someone would look closely, his wounds were healing at a frightening rate. Some were almost healed, leaving only faint scar. It was conceptually incomprehensible. Pyowool himself was a being who denied the common sense of others, but Nam Xinwu was denying even the common sense of such a person. He heard that there is one more person like this in Jianghu. Was it the Ghost King? Hong Yeshan referred to him as the greatest mystery of the current Jianghu. It's not just that the martial arts are strong. It was because people believed that he had the secret of immortality. Pyowool shook his head. Because it was an absurd idea. As long as someone is born as a human, it is natural for them to die someday. He didn't know if it was possible to reject the end stage of life, but even if it was possible, he didn't know what the price would be. Pyowool's indifferent gaze suddenly turned forward, because someone was walking from the other side. For the first time a crack appeared on Pyeolwul's face. He could clearly see someone, but he couldn't feel any trace of their presence. This is the first time this has happened since he came to Jeonju. There were many times that people couldn't feel his presence, but this was the first time he couldn't feel someone's presence. All of Pyeolwul's nerves were all on edge. Like a hedgehog with thorns, his nerves rose sharply and his senses expanded. Tuck. However, Pyeolwul's sense was blocked in the middle in front of him. Something faint, as if obscured by a dense mist, disturbed the senses of Pyeolwul. A red light flashed in Pyeolwul's eyes. Because it was the first time he felt such a sense of crisis. Suddenly, his muscles stiffened and his shoulders tightened. Pyeolwul, with Nam Shinwoo on one side, stood tall and looked at the approaching person. At that moment, a gust of wind blew and swirled around Pyeolwul's whole body. It was not just Pyeolwul's illusion that the wind that should have been refreshing felt eerie. The wind swept through Pyeolwul's whole body with a will. In Pyeolwul's eyes, the figure of the unknown enemy grew darker and darker. Now it seemed that only two red lights were floating in the darkness. For a moment, he felt the presence on the other side startled. Pyeolwul widened the senses of his whole body. Then he felt the wind blowing through him get stronger. It was like a snake crawling all over his body. That feeling was not unfamiliar to Pyeolwul. Snakes feel, measure, and grasp their opponents with their whole body. He felt the snake's sensations in the wind. The wind was scanning Pyeolwul's whole body, trying to grasp everything. To be precise, the person who was controlling the wind is trying to figure out Pyeolwul. But he didn't know. Pyeolwul is not a person who shows his inner feelings to others. Rather, it was the opposite. Pyeolwul's energy began to move. After squeezing the wind that ran through his body, it began to seep in the opposite direction. Just as a single drop of ink pollutes the clear water in a basin, Pyeolwul's dark and humid air pollutes the wind, making it go back to the original source. The air from Pyeolwul moved like a snake, splitting into numerous of pieces. Tisk. The sound of a tongue clicking erupted from the mouth of the person who was trying to use the wind to measure Pyeolwul. Although his face remained invisible, there was a sign of disappointment coming from his body. Because this was his first time. He hurriedly cut off the wind and tried to cut off his connection with Pyeolwul. But Pyeolwul didn't let him do that. Pyeolwul's air persisted against the wind. Just as thousands of serpents droop while biting their prey, the air of Pyeolwul crawled in order to reach the original source. Pyeolwul did the same thing he did. He copied the act of the other person, trying to grasp him with the wind. It was like an act of insulting others. But Pyeolwul didn't care about such petty emotions. The unknown person tried to figure himself out first, and he only copied his actions. There was no room for trivial emotions like guilt to intervene. This was a fight. A fight that his opponent initiated. Pyeolwul was ready to do anything to win the fight. Even if it means stealing the opponent's technique and learning it. It didn't matter if it was cowardly, because he survived that way. Just because his martial arts had reached a certain level, he had no intention of being complacent. If there is something better, he will learn to haunt it, and even if it is robbed, it will rise to a higher place. At that moment, a lion's roar erupted from the opponent. Go! The roar became a storm and devoured Pyeolwul.